Today on RoxomTV News, missiles are now hitting commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil choke points, which is a fancy way of saying the global economy is once again discovering how expensive geopolitical drama can get. Inside Iran, authorities have arrested dozens of people for social media posts about the war, because in modern conflicts, controlling the narrative online is starting to matter almost as much as controlling the territory on the ground. In New York, a second trial against Tornado Cash developer Roman Storm is raising a big question for the tech world, whether writing open source code can now make you legally responsible for how strangers use it. Meanwhile, the IRS is reportedly sending crypto users a new audit form that asks about more than 100 exchanges and wallets, which sounds less like a tax document and more like someone trying to reconstruct your entire digital life. And a 12-foot statue of Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein striking the Titanic pose has appeared on the National Mall, proving that in 2026, even political protest art apparently comes with cinematic references. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Bitcoin is currently trading around $70,000, and that brings us to our top story of the morning, so let's get into it. In the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway between Iran and Oman that carries roughly 20% of the world's oil and gas supply, the conflict escalated again this morning as three commercial vessels were struck by projectiles in what has become one of the most intense days of maritime attacks since the fighting began. A Thailand-flagged ship caught fire after being hit, forcing the evacuation of 20 crew members. A Japanese vessel owned by Mitsui was also struck, along with a Marshall Islands bulk carrier that reportedly took a missile hit. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, has now claimed responsibility for the attacks. And that brings the total number of vessels targeted in the region to at least 14 since February 28th, ending a brief 72-hour stretch when some analysts thought tensions might be easing. Instead, shipping traffic through the strait has slowed dramatically as companies reassess the risks of sending vessels through an active war zone. The Pentagon also released an updated casualty figures from the broader conflict, confirming 8 U.S. soldiers were killed and roughly 140 wounded, while Iranian officials claim that more than 1,300 civilians have died and nearly 10,000 sites have been struck. When the world's busiest oil choke point turns into a battlefield, the consequences rarely stay local. Energy markets, shipping costs, and global supply chains tend to react quickly, which is why developments in this narrow stretch of water often ripple outward into the global economy. Inside Iran, the government is tightening control over the online narrative surrounding the war. Authorities say that 81 people have been arrested for posting content on social media that officials claim created what they described as a tension for the public mind. That phrase comes from Iran's National Security Forces commander, who warned that anyone spreading material considered destabilizing during wartime could be treated as an enemy of the state. The arrests were first reported by the Associated Press and appear to be part of a broader effort by several governments in the region to control wartime information online. Human rights organizations say that dozens of people have also been detained in Bahrain and Qatar for sharing posts authorities described as misleading or inflammatory. Israel has imposed its own restrictions as well, banning the publication of photos or videos that could reveal the location of military strikes. Rights groups argue that these measures raise concerns about freedom of expression, while governments say controlling information is necessary to prevent panic and protect operational security. What's unfolding here highlights a shift in how modern conflicts actually operate. The battle over information, what gets posted, shared, or suppressed online, is now considered almost as strategically important as what happens on the battlefield itself. Over in New York, the U.S. Department of Justice is preparing to take another run at Tornado Cash developer Roman Storm. Federal prosecutors have asked a judge to schedule a second trial in fall of 2026 after Storm's first trial ended in a partial verdict. The jury convicted him on one charge tied to operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, but they could not reach agreement on two more serious counts: conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to violate U.S. sanctions law. That deadlock left prosecutors with the option to retry those charges, and the DOJ is now moving forward with exactly that. Storm was originally indicted in 2023 for helping build Tornado Cash, a privacy protocol designed to obscure blockchain transactions. Critics of the case argue the government is effectively trying to hold an open source software developer responsible for how strangers use decentralized code, which would represent a major shift in how software liability works in the United States. Others, however, counter that privacy tools can enable illicit activity and that regulators need legal tools to deal with it. And what happens next matters well beyond any one developer. If the courts decide software creators can be held criminally liable for how their code is used, that precedent could influence where future crypto builders choose to launch their projects and whether the United States remains a place where this kind of financial infrastructure gets developed at all. The IRS is drawing attention to their own in the crypto world with a document that looks less like a tax form and more like a full map of someone's digital footprint. A Bitcoin media outlet called TFTC recently posted about a new audit document being sent to certain taxpayers. Now, the post says that taxpayers under the audit are being sent a historical digital asset form listing more than 100 plus exchanges and self-custody wallets, including Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, FTX, Mt. Gox, MetaMask, Ledger, Trezor, and demands you check yes or no for every single one and then sign under the penalty of perjury. TFTC described it as a mapping exercise designed to build a complete picture of a person's crypto history. Tax attorneys confirm the document exists, though it is not a standard filing that most taxpayers would actually see. Instead, it appears to be used during audits to reconstruct someone's entire history across exchanges, wallets, and decentralized finance platforms. Or in other words, the era when crypto activity could quietly exist outside the traditional reporting system is steadily fading. Anyone holding or trading digital assets should expect tax authorities to have a much clearer picture of that activity going forward. And over in Washington, D.C., visitors walking across the National Mall recently encountered something that definitely wasn't part of the Smithsonian tour brochure. A nearly 12-foot statue depicting Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein appeared on the lawn, recreating the iconic pose from the movie Titanic. You remember that one. Yeah, the one where the characters stand at the front of the ship with their arms stretched into the wind and say, "I'm the king of the world." You remember it. Of course you do. Now, the installation was created by an anonymous art collective calling itself The Secret Handshake. According to the group, the statue is meant as a political commentary referencing Trump's past social relationship with Epstein, who was later convicted of sex offenses involving minors. And for those of you that forgot at home, he is mentioned over 18,000 times in the Epstein files. That's more than Harry Potter is in his own books, all of them. Now, the collective has pulled similar stunts like this before. You see, only 5 months ago, they placed another statue in Washington depicting Trump holding hands with Epstein. Take a look.
Here in D.C., take a look. A statue of President Trump has appeared on the National Mall. It depicts Trump holding hands with Jeffrey Epstein. A plaque reads, "In honor of Friendship Month, we celebrate the long-lasting bond between President Donald J. Trump and his closest friend, Jeffrey Epstein." Now, authorities have not said who put this statue there. Trump has repeatedly tried to distance himself from Epstein after a birthday letter bearing his signature surfaced. President Trump has denied writing that letter.
Now, the sculpture has already drawn crowds and sparked debates online about whether it qualifies as satire, protest, or political provocation. You see, moments like this show how modern political discourse increasingly spills out of campaign speeches and into viral public spectacles, where a single image, or in this case, a 12-foot statue, can drive conversation across the entire internet within hours. All right, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News. But when we're back, I'm going to be joined by the one and only Nolan Bowerly to make sense of all the madness in today's news. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
All right, so welcome back to Roxom TV News. Right now, I want to welcome in the man that can connect the dots like no one else. One of Roxom TV's own, Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, how are you this morning? Thanks for joining us. Happy Wednesday, my friend.
Enthusiastic about the future of humanity. Things are going great.
Well, I'm glad you are, Nolan, because I want to talk about this first story, and it's got me a little less enthusiastic than normal because we've been tracking this situation, you and I, in the Strait of Hormuz for a bit now. And there was a brief stretch where attacks seemed to pause, and some analysts were thinking that tensions might be easing. Now we're seeing reports that not one, not two, but three more ships were struck, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard is claiming responsibility from that. From your perspective, what are you making of this latest development? Is this suggesting the conflict is entering a more dangerous phase? What is your initial beat on this one?
Well, my first beat is that Raisin Kane, a general, I forget his exact title, but the guy, the Joint Chiefs, the guy who's heading the Joint Chiefs on this mission, gave a briefing yesterday about the mining of the Strait of Hormuz, because that's what's happened with these ships. There's been mines put into the strait. And he didn't really sound like he had much of a plan. It was kind of like start to look at, and it was like, well, wait a minute, this is the whole issue. So it didn't really make any of the commercial captains very confident because it doesn't look like there's a plan indeed. Even worse news than that, it turns out that the four anti-mining ships. So America had four anti-mine ships deployed, learning how to demine the Strait of Hormuz for the past 40 years. They actually just arrived in Philadelphia yesterday. They've been decommissioned, so they're gone right when we would need them.
No, really quick clarification, because when you say mining the strait, what does that exactly mean? I'm a little unfamiliar with that term in relation to something like the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, so the Strait of Hormuz, right? The reason why those three ships had trouble was because there's boats that go in and put actual, like, not land mines, but water mines.
Oh, that kind. Okay, mining the ships.
Yeah, they put mines into the water and then they hit it,
right,
and bang.
Those floating ones. Okay.
Yeah.
And,
well, I don't know if they're floating.
We
I think they do have to hide underwater. I don't know how they're deployed. I really don't know what the technology is for water mines. I wonder why we can't just do flyovers. Why do we need ships? But my understanding is you can't do flyovers because they are submerged somewhat. So you can't spot them.
I was thinking those like World War II spiky ones you'd see on like the beaches of Normandy and stuff that seemed to be floating.
Yeah,
that was what I was.
That's also what my mind says. So in that case, planes could work. You don't need. I don't know why you would need like anti-mining ships. So there must be a reason why you can't use aerial surveillance for it. My guess, and I don't know, is that they're slightly submerged and hard to find. Now the anti-mining ships that we have are gone. I think you can just put any, I mean, I don't know why you would need a specific kind of ship. I'm sure we have useless ships that we wouldn't mind using to trip the mines and actually just get rid of them that way. Trump has threatened, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of dummy ships out there. Take all them Russian yachts that are all gone rotten now that they seized. They had no trouble. They're worried about the $50 million house the Ayatollah has in London, and like, what do we do with it? Well, they took the FC soccer club from the Russian guy and all the yachts. So what are you doing? Just do it. But the actual ships, I'm sure they could put some dummy ships through. But anyway, none of this is good. It doesn't look like there's even a plan to get rid of the mines other than the Trump threat. So we'll see. It doesn't look like right now the naval escorts are willing to go through. And it looks like Iran is still dominating or still shipping off the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz. Apparently, none of China's oil has actually been stopped. They're getting more, apparently. So I don't even know what the American, if that's true, I don't know what the American ships are even doing. Just take them. But the one piece of good news that did come out of all of this is that there's, so, you know, Iran is Persian, right? And there's provinces within Iran. There's the Kurdistan province. There's the Azerbaijani province up north, but there's also an Arab province, right? So not all people in Iran are Persians. Persians and Arabs are not the same people, I guess. And so there is an Arab side of Iran. And yesterday, and that's where the oil is. And yesterday, they've gone against officially and for good the Iranian government. They don't want to separate and break Iran apart, but they're now allying with the Arab states and are sort of on that side. So that might mean that the Americans will have an invitation to take the oil fields and the island where all of the stuff is deployed. So that might be the solution to the mining issue. But right now, it's a major problem. I think we're right in the middle of fog of war. If the stories are changing so quickly from day to day, I don't think there is great intel out there, and it's a major problem.
Yeah, and you mentioned an interesting phrase, the fog of war, and I think about the actual depiction of that, and it means kind of when I hear that, I means we have no idea where this is going, right? Which is interesting because Trump came out, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, and was like, "This is going to end soon." And I think Pete Hegseth said something that was almost completely contradictory only hours before, like, we're going to keep pounding them. So my question for you is, we're already seeing the ramifications of this war show up here literally half a world away, specifically in the pump right now. Is the gas station by the office here, I saw go up $1 in the last 2 days per gallon, and I know a lot of people at home are feeling it. So based on what you're seeing right now, Nolan, does this feel like this might be an extended thing, or do you think Trump might know something we don't when he says he thinks this is coming to a close quickly?
It's still fog of war, and I think there's been a deliberate strategy. I can't mind read, but part of the fog of war is to deliver unreliable intelligence publicly. So you've been hearing all of these different timelines. I think that's deliberate. I think people, probably have an idea of how much time, but you'll hear 8 weeks from one person, 3 weeks from another, 4 weeks from another. I've seen someone analyze Trump. He's doing these regular exclusive calls with all kinds of legacy media outlets, giving them individually different timelines. So they all have an exclusive, but they all contradict each other. That could be a war strategy so that Iran doesn't really know how to get its footing. They don't know what to prepare for. The adversary doesn't really have good intel. So part of it is laundering information in order to confuse the enemy and deliberately confusing the timelines. But I'll go back to what Trump said. He said 4 weeks. We're a week and a half through now. It doesn't look like Iran will continue to have, remember, even if there was a peace deal right now, it doesn't look like Iran could enforce it because they cut off the head of the snake when it comes to military top-down command. There is no more chain of command. There are people operating on instructions that say, don't listen to anyone who takes control. You're on your own. You're in charge of your munitions. You're in charge of all that stuff. So that could be possible. I think that's one of the solutions here. Indeed, again, the sky monitoring of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, that might work. They've had all that target practice against the drug boats in the Caribbean. It's the same thing, like they've been doing target practice. So maybe that's the answer. But right now, indeed, yesterday I was pretty confident with oil prices going way down. It looked like there were ships going through, but now that we know that the U.S. Navy is not willing to do any escorts, they've been asked by commercial ships for escorts. And, Trump, I don't think it's very persuasive when he says to them, they got to man up and just go through. Well, these, I have a phobia of the open seas with ships because I saw that Perfect Storm movie, and I don't want to be like, these guys know, you can't tell a guy on a seaman that they're not man enough. Anyone who's crossed an ocean in a boat, I don't think they're doubting their manliness. So
there's a reason those deep sea fishers make like 300 grand for 6 months work.
Yeah, The Deadliest Catch and all that stuff. I've seen those shows, man. That's an absolute nightmare fuel for me. So
man up on the open ocean where everybody's got guns and there are Somali pirates everywhere and everything's on fire. Thank you. Let's do that.
It's not a very persuasive argument. So I don't think that's really what he means, because normally he can be persuasive. So and his own military that he's commanding is not willing to do it. They've been asked several times and they are saying, not until it's demined, we're not going in there. So no one's getting an escort right now. And in fact, I believe, I forget who in the administration had said yesterday that it was happening. There were escorts. Today we find out that's a bunch of bullshit. It's not happening. So I just would like to see the strategy. I still think the timelines hold. The capacity of Iran is certainly degraded. We can take a lot of this oil, or the Americans can take a lot of this oil on the north shore of the Strait of Hormuz. The Arab connection is going to play a part in this that we just heard. They're recognizing Pahlavi as the leader and hoping he comes in, the former the son of the Shah. So we'll see what's going on. But indeed, we're in the fog of war. I don't think anyone's getting really reliable intel. The best way to look right now is the flow of traffic. It is ground to a halt again. I don't think this has had a big effect on prices in oil today. I think that the Trump moves from before have insulated the American market. So what you're experiencing in California is just typical, probably California manipulation. You're just not getting a good deal in California because it's California, you know, all that Getty's stuff. California, as I understand, oil wise, is completely separate from the rest of the country, not just in tax, also in infrastructure, Indonesian connections. And it's a very obscure and different element to what America usually enjoys for energy abundance. So California is on its own. I wouldn't take California's oil prices as the proxy here, but prices coming up in America would be a problem.
I mean, 50 million of us are definitely feeling it right now. I've already seen the 6 start creeping up as the first number, and that's the when I know I need to start riding my bike more. And also, in addition to talking about this fog of war, some other things that we have to get wrapped up here in a sec, but a couple other things I saw recently is they're already saying, there are reports, and again, this is in the fog of war, that the new Khamenei might already be injured, which is wild, and he's being hidden in some kind of underground bunkers. But again, fog of war info. And we did get the team told us today that Trump actually said the war with Iran will end soon because there's practically nothing left to target. Those were his words as of today. So we'll see. Fog of war, I don't know. But we're always glad to have you here to help us clear that fog and make sense of this chaos, Nolan. I know we're cutting you a little short today, but we always appreciate your time. And yeah, my man, any final thoughts before we let you go?
Yeah, I'll touch very quickly on the Epstein statue thing. So my prediction, I like to make predictions because predictions, if they come true, are a proof that the world you used when you made the prediction is true. Anytime you see people demanding Epstein files, it's because they think there's a Trump connection imminent. So Epstein files, I think you're going to get another drop of Epstein files information within the next, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks once this Iran war wraps up, and should be more interesting storylines and more interesting stuff. So if I'm right about this, you're going to see people clamoring, hoping Trump falls, the walls are closing in, and you're going to get more Epstein files declassification, which will probably backfire again on the people demanding for them, and then they don't want to see them again. So we'll see, but that's my prediction.
We will see. If you're right again, Nolan, I'm starting a new prediction market called Bowerly Market. And it's just whatever you say, and we're just going to put it up there and have people bet on it. So I'm just letting you know now. All right, Nolan, we enjoyed your time with you as always, and we'll see you tomorrow, my friend. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Take it easy.
Cheers. All right, we're taking a break here at Roxom TV News Gang, but when we return, we're going to be joined by our special guest of the hour to break it all down. He is the CEO of Casa, so you're going to want to stay tuned, and we check that out in just a bit. We'll be right back with Roxom TV News after this.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising. The dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. This morning, President Donald Trump told Axios that the war with Iran will end, quote, soon, because there's practically nothing left to target. He says the operation was designed as a 6-week campaign and the U.S. is way ahead of the timetable. But nobody else in the coalition is saying it's almost over. In fact, Israel's defense minister said today the war will continue without any time limit for as long as necessary. And on the ground today, the same day Trump said there's nothing left to hit, Iranian drones struck fuel tanks in Oman. Iran launched its most intense and heaviest barrage of the war. 3 more ships were attacked in the Hormuz Strait, and the IEA announced the largest emergency oil release in history. So, a lot of good stuff. Moving on, at the United Nations, diplomats gathered for an emergency security council meeting focused on the rapidly worsening fighting in Lebanon. The session was called by France and supported by the United Kingdom, Denmark, Greece, and Latvia as violence along Israel's northern border continues to intensify. But the most notable development may be a draft resolution introduced by Bahrain, calling for an immediate halt to Iranian attacks on Gulf states and demanding an end to the use of proxy militias in the conflict. That proposal is expected to head toward a vote, and the urgency comes from how quickly the Lebanon front has expanded since Hezbollah entered the war earlier this month. At least 570 people have been killed and more than 500,000 have been displaced, according to regional estimates. Israel has launched a ground incursion involving commandos operating under the cover of darkness, while Hezbollah says it detected Israeli helicopters approaching from Syrian territory. Airstrikes have also intensified. Israeli strikes killed at least 95 people in Lebanon on Tuesday alone, including a Maronite Catholic priest in the southern village of Quayla, after he told France 24 he planned to stay and defend his village peacefully. Lebanon's parliament has extended its own term by 2 years amid the instability, while Israel's defense minister says the military campaign has no fixed timeline. Now, whenever the Lebanon front heats up, it tends to signal that a regional conflict may be entering a more unpredictable phase. And over in Caracas, Venezuela, home to the largest proven oil reserves in the world, major Western energy companies are preparing for a significant return. Reuters reports that both Chevron and Shell are closing in on new oil agreements with Venezuela's state energy company, PDVSA. If finalized, these would be the first major oil deals in the country since the United States captured President Nicolas Maduro earlier this year. The companies would gain expanded access to Venezuela's heavy oil belt, one of the largest untapped petroleum regions on the planet. Now, at the same time, PDVSA is reviewing all of its existing contracts and warning that projects that remain inactive or underperforming could see their deals revoked by the end of March. Now, the timing of these negotiations is not exactly subtle. With shipping disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz and energy infrastructure across parts of the Gulf under pressure, global oil markets are facing one of their most volatile periods in decades. President Trump has described the Venezuela effort as part of a $100 billion push to rebuild the country's oil industry after years of economic collapse under Maduro and the Chavez governments. And when supply shocks hit global energy markets, producers that have been sidelined for years suddenly become strategically important again. And Venezuela is now moving quickly back into that conversation. All right, we're taking a break here at RoxomTV News. And when we're back, we're going to be joined by our guest of the hour, Nick Newman, the CEO of CASA, to make sense of it all. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Nick and more after this quick break.
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Now, joining us on our show this morning to help make sense of the world of Bitcoin and where we are at in Bitcoin's journey right now is the CEO of Casa, Nick Newman. Everybody, Nick, welcome to the show. So great having you. Thanks for joining us this morning. How are you?
Of course. Thanks, Hank. Doing great. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, the pleasure is all ours, and let's just jump into it because I know our time is limited this morning, Nick. Really quickly, I want to just kind of start. I love getting people in the industry story about how they got into Bitcoin, what their orange pill moment was like. How did this ultimately play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I got into Bitcoin back in, I would say it was around the 2017 bull market. Before that, I'd worked, actually started my career as a banker. So was in the finance world, but just over on the dark side, you know. So started my career as a banker, and then I ended up transitioning into working on Bitcoin around 2017. And really, the thing that most attracted me is pretty aligned with what we do at Casa, and it was this idea that you could hold your money yourself and not have to trust a bank or another third party, where we've seen throughout human history, really, that there's just been continual problems that arise from trusting that third party with your money. And so that's what we do at Casa, is we make it easy for people to secure their Bitcoin, to hold the keys themselves, to have control over it themselves. And that was the first thing that really got me interested in Bitcoin in the first place.
Amazing. And I will just tell us a little bit more about Casa. Like, who is it for? Who is your typical client? Is it more for newer Bitcoiners, more experienced people? Who do you find usually benefits the most from your product?
I mean, the people that benefit the most from it are probably, it's typically people that are storing larger amounts of Bitcoin. So whether you're new to Bitcoin or you've been in Bitcoin since 2013, you know, the product is for you if you have a meaningful amount of Bitcoin that you would be pretty upset, or it would be a life-changing event if you were to lose it. And so there's really that type of like sovereign individual, large holder of Bitcoin. But we also work with businesses, enterprises, governments who have large amounts of Bitcoin as well, that need a really robust way to secure that. And across all of it, the common theme is just Casa clients have control of their assets, and we help them do self-custody right.
Very cool. And without getting into it too much more, because you and I have a lot to talk about, if anybody's interested, it's just at casa.com, or where can I send them if they wanted to get more info on Casa?
It's casa.io. We have not secured casa.com yet, but one day.
One day, yeah. That seems like it's probably a pretty enviable domain name to have.
That's its own fun story that we don't need to get into today, but maybe another time.
All right, great. All right, because I actually do want to get into some stories here, Nick, because before we had you on air today, someone from your team shared a draft of an article you're working on that I thought was super interesting, called Bitcoin is Misclassified. And in it, you argue that the market has been thinking about Bitcoin kind of the wrong way for years now, mainly putting it in the inflation hedge category next to gold. So really, I'd love to kind of just pick your brain about this and first start with, what made you start thinking about Bitcoin through that lens? I would love to get more info on this.
Well, I think this is something like one of the things where I really started thinking about this, or one of the reasons I really started thinking about this, was over the last 6 months or so, really since Bitcoin hit the high in October of last year, we've seen Bitcoin have a drawdown of about 50%. And then during that same time, gold's up like 40% or something. I could be a little bit off with these numbers, but this has been causing this general angst in the Bitcoin community that's like, hey, I thought Bitcoin was this inflation hedge, it's digital gold. So why do we see Bitcoin struggling so much in this market when gold is outperforming so much? And I think we've seen people kind of tying themselves into these like mental knots to say, oh, here's why Bitcoin is underperforming, and you know, it's going to come back. It's just like gold is going to go up, and then Bitcoin's going to have a second leg up that's much more than gold, and all this kind of thing. And I just feel like maybe there's a more fundamental reason here for why Bitcoin has struggled in this environment. And maybe it just stems from a market misunderstanding about what the use of Bitcoin is. And so that's what kind of got me down this path in the first place, and has led to developing some of my thoughts around this.
Very interesting. And I mean, that really strikes to the core of one of the main issues in the Bitcoin space is that there's just so many people that aren't educated in what it is. It gets easily dismissed by those that are uninformed, right?
Well,
So that's
I think it's
definitely
even
part
more
of, I
than
think,
that, right?
yeah.
Because if you look at how we as a community have marketed Bitcoin to the world over the last like 8 to 10 years, I feel like this really started, we in early Bitcoin days before I was even in the Bitcoin community, pre 2017, we talked more about using Bitcoin as money, I think. And then
Yeah.
since the 2017 bull market, it's really shifted. The narrative has shifted to be more about Bitcoin as digital gold. And it becomes this inflation hedge, right? And it's just a better inflation hedge than gold because of the properties of Bitcoin. And so this is not even just misunderstanding, like people are uneducated. Like we've actively been marketing Bitcoin as a tool in this way. And I'm just saying, I think
Yeah.
maybe we're actually not correctly telling Bitcoin's story and really talking about the all of the characteristics of Bitcoin that make it a much more valuable asset than how the market is pricing it today.
Interesting. And you actually kind of talked about one of these misunderstandings in your piece that I read that I thought was really interesting is you mentioned that one of the core ideas is that inflation risk and geopolitical risk are actually two completely different problems, even though a lot of investors might treat them the same way. Can you kind of explain that distinction for us a little bit?
Yeah, so this is where this is where I think Bitcoin is being misunderstood is we talk about it a lot as an inflation hedge, but actually it has qualities that make it not just an inflation hedge, but also a hedge against geopolitical risk, also a hedge against systemic risk in our financial system, in the banking system, and then finally, actually a form of money that you can use as a medium of exchange much more easily than you could gold. And so Bitcoin is actually just a different type of asset than gold and should not be as directly compared to gold as we have been over the last 8 to 10 years. And so when you think about like, okay, what's the difference between inflation risk and geopolitical risk? Well, inflation risk is something that happens gradually over time. I mean, so it can be kind of gradually then suddenly, right? But
Yeah.
you can forecast this inflation risk a little bit better. You can see, okay, the government is taking these policies through the central bank. And so we expect that inflation will be in this range over the next short to medium time period, right? With geopolitical risk, it's much more of a sudden thing. Geopolitical risk is like, while inflation may be death by 1,000 cuts, geopolitical risk, please excuse the gory metaphor, is like just guillotining your head off kind of thing. Because the government comes in, takes some sort of action that just completely cuts off your ability to use your money. And so it's an instant, sudden, potentially unexpected thing. And it's this combination of like the geography that you're in and the politics of that region, and then how that influences kind of your local world, but also the world order at large. And so what we're seeing is, I think inflation used to be this tail risk type of event where people 10 years ago, like Bitcoiners were talking about it, gold bugs were talking about it, but a lot of people were like, inflation is just not something we need to worry about. And then it became more an accepted societal level problem over the last like 5 years since COVID. But geopolitical risk, I think, is something that is actually in that bucket right now, where it is a tail risk that people are underestimating today, except for in certain pockets of society where they're thinking about it more. And it's going to grow. It's growing significantly as a risk and will become more of a mainstream thing over the next few years. And so people should be thinking about how to protect themselves against that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. The world has never really seemed as volatile as it does right now. And, as we've seen with Trump in office, he's willing to say and do anything at a moment's notice. So as I always call him, I'm trying to make this phrase work. I don't know if it'll catch on. I say that Trump kind of practices what I call bipolar politics. It's like one thing one day, the opposite the next, and you see the whole market move with that risk that he ultimately kind of puts into the system with just the way he is.
Yep.
And you mentioned, inflation is something that kind of slowly erodes the value of your money and your assets over time. But this geopolitical risk actually puts people at risk of not having access to their like their funds and their assets, right? So why is that today? Why do you think that type of risk is becoming more and more relevant and maybe even prevalent in today's world? Is it because of the digitization of money, or because that seems to be a very more and more common problem? I mean, that's part of the reason Bitcoin exists, right?
Yeah, so I would say it's a couple of factors. It's probably the digitization of money is part of it. So now, in order to cut somebody off from their bank account, it's the press of a button rather than, oh, I need to go and seize a bunch of physical cash or something like that. I think that if you, and then, so that's the first thing, that digitization side. And then the second thing is just the world order in general is becoming more multipolar, and trust overall is degrading between countries, within countries, like in society overall. People are less willing to work together. Even just looking at the US as a microcosm, every time a new political party gets into power, you've got they kind of push the envelope a little bit more. They're saying, what can we do from a lawfare and financial overreach side of things to punish the other side for their perceived transgressions? And so more and more they're finding ways to fight each other rather than finding ways to cooperate and to try to get things done that's in the best interest of the country. And then you look at things like the global sanctions index. It's up like over 400% since 2017. Active sanctions are growing like 25 to 30% year over year. G7 froze a bunch of Russia's reserves in 2022, which was a really clear like country level reserve moment, I think, for people. And that's triggered some central banks over the last few years to start diversifying out of US treasuries and out of money that's connected to the US financial system. And so you're seeing these signs that are pointing towards this world getting having less trust. Trust is degrading. And then you're seeing a more multipolar world where everybody isn't just living in the US's, leadership bubble. And so, sometimes I hate to use sanctions as an indicator for this, because like a lot of people are like, well, the sanctions are good because we put the sanctions on the bad guys. And so obviously that's not going to happen to me as a non-bad guy. And why are you arguing against them? Like, we want to use this as a tool to fight against the bad guys where we don't have to send in troops and do something. Well, I think that this gets back to that idea of like, who is in power and how is that pendulum swinging? Because that pendulum is swinging harder and harder each time power changes hands. And it's getting harder to tell like how much that willingness to work together is breaking down, and how much, or what that level of risk is that you can become the target next when the opposing party gets into power. And so, that I think are all the signals of like why people should be paying attention to this more than they are.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that's kind of been going on, at least in American politics, for, God, like 30 years now. It's like, it's no longer about let's do best for the country. It's total victory on one side or the other. And that's all that matters. And it's really an unfortunate situation we found ourselves in, because that's definitely not what's best for the country.
Right.
And, I was going through your article. I want to bring it back to that. Another interesting point that you made, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, was that we're seeing central banks seemingly diversify out of like things that have to do with America. So there are a lot of them are now hedging seemingly against this geopolitical risk with gold and part of me wonders, do you think this erosion of trust that we're seeing in governments, in banks, will ultimately be one of the biggest on-ramps for new Bitcoiners going forward, as people ultimately just decide they've had enough and actually start looking for alternatives? Because we're all people, and we don't really react on things till it hits us at home. So as we start having more and more distrust for governments and institutions, do you think this is going to be a really big on-ramp for Bitcoin in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
I think it could be, but only if we properly educate people about this, which is why I'm talking about this, right? Because there are pitfalls, and we should go into this later. Let's talk about what you just asked, but then let's talk about the ETF later. But that's one of the pitfalls of this overall for the average person. But just focusing on will this cause Bitcoin adoption, and what have we seen from central banks trying to diversify away from the U.S. financial system and U.S. controlled assets, is we've seen central banks buying gold. And so more diversification into gold. I think it was something like in 2021, there was 450 tons of gold bought by central banks. And then in 2022 and 2023, it was more than double. It was over 1,000 tons of gold bought by central banks each year. And so they are actively diversifying into gold. And so I think that they're doing that because they are used to gold as this 5,000-year-old asset, right? But there are downsides to gold that do not exist in Bitcoin that make Bitcoin a much better geopolitical risk hedge and systemic risk hedge than gold is. And so when you look at, I think the main three qualities of this are basically, is this asset issued by a centralized entity or government? If it is, then there is risk, geopolitical risk by nature, because that is a single choke point for that asset. How easy is it to move this asset, to use it when you need to? And this is where I think gold really falls behind. When central banks buy gold, they need a place to store it. And ironically, a lot of the central banks that are buying gold store it in facilities run by the US or the UK, because they don't have the physical security facilities in order to store it themselves. So you're kind of taking this diversification play and just putting it right back into the control of the people that you're potentially trying to diversify away from. So Bitcoin, on the other hand, it's natively digital. All it takes, if you really want, is a piece of paper with 12 words on it to store it. Now, obviously, as a central bank, you don't want to be taking that approach. Call us, we can help you. But that's the simplest way that you could do it. And then the third point is you can use it without relying on a third party. So not only do you not need to, or not only is it easy to transport and it's not issued by any third parties, if you want to use it as an asset to buy things, which you need eventually, that's why you keep reserves, that's why you keep money. You don't have to send that through the banking system. And so that is a very helpful and important part. And when you think about gold, you can kind of do this today, but moving physical gold and using it to get the exact purchasing power that you want, it's kind of a pain. But Bitcoin, it's incredibly easy, right? And so these are these three qualities of Bitcoin that I think are important for people to recognize when it comes to its use as a geopolitical hedge, where it has a big advantage over any other asset in the world. So that brings us to this last point here, which is you miss all of this if you hold the Bitcoin ETF instead of the real Bitcoin, because the Bitcoin ETF is basically just wrapping real Bitcoin, and sticking it into a brokerage account. So it's now issued by, the ETF shares are issued by a centralized entity. You go through a centralized brokerage to use it. You can't transport it or use it for anything. All you can do is trade it in your account. And so I think that when you look at how people have been adopting Bitcoin over the last couple of years, they have the opportunity to have a new form of money and a tool that they can use to protect themselves against some of these really big tail risks in the world. But if you choose the ETF route, which feels comfortable, feels convenient, you completely eliminate all of that opportunity or all of that advantage for yourself.
Yeah, no, that's an absolute, it's a great point. With that being said, though, do you think at least the ETFs serve as maybe at least a temporary on-ramp so people can kind of get comfortable and, owning Bitcoin? Because I remember when I first got it, it was a wild ride. I see the price fluctuations, I'm freaking out. But having been in it now for a decade, like obviously it feels like much calmer waters, even when the price doesn't necessarily dictate that. So do you think, is there any benefit to the ETFs, at least as an on-ramp, or in your world, it's just like it doesn't really make sense because you're not holding it natively?
No, I think there are certainly benefits and certain types of investors with specific investment theses around Bitcoin for whom the ETF makes sense. If you are investing in Bitcoin purely as an inflation hedge or purely just like, I want to make more dollars because of this investment in Bitcoin, then the ETF probably works fine for you. Especially if you're not somebody who really knows how to or feels comfortable managing their own keys, that it's like, I'd rather you, if you're not looking to use Bitcoin as freedom money, basically, I'd rather you not use Bitcoin in a way where you might lose everything. But that being said, like, this is the thing that Casa and I'm sure others in our industry are really trying to fix, because I think it is, even though we've done tons of work on making using real Bitcoin much more accessible for people, we still have a long way to go, because with the ETF, you go into your brokerage account and you hit a button and there you got some Bitcoin. And so we need to bring this sovereign aspect of Bitcoin to that same level of ease for people so that everybody has access to the full range of benefits that you get with Bitcoin.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, my friend. And I'm excited because I believe we're going to be having you and other team members at the Casa family come in on Roxom to chat about this. Like, as you mentioned, the education is probably the most important part. And we're super excited to have you and more of the Casa family over here to help educate the masses like we're doing here at Roxom TV. So I really want to thank you for your time today, Nick. It was an absolute treat. Remember, everybody, you can check out Casa at casa.io. And Nick, you've been bringing the heat all episode. So what's the best place our audience can go if they want more of your takes on the industry? Do you have an X account that they can follow?
Yep. So you can follow me on X at nnewman. It's NNEUMAN. And so I'll be posting this article that we've been talking about pretty soon here, and then would love to have that conversation over on X with people.
Amazing. Well, Nick, it's been an absolute blast having a conversation here with you at Roxom TV News. So I want to thank you for your time this morning and joining us. And again, I encourage everybody to check out casa.io. And yeah, my friend, we're excited to have you and the team back again real soon. And I want to thank you again for your time this Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Amazing. Thank you, Hank. Have a good one.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Cheers. All right, gang, we're taking a break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we're diving into our second hour of today's programming, including everyone's favorite independent journalist, Frank Corba, will be joining us in just a bit to make sense of the madness. So stay tuned. Roxom TV News will be coming right back after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising. The dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to Roxom TV News. We're about to jump into our second hour of this morning's programming. But earlier this morning, President Donald Trump told Axios that the war with Iran will end, quote, soon, because there's practically nothing left to target. He says the operation was designed as a 6-week campaign and the U.S. is way ahead of schedule, or timetable is what he said, quote. But nobody else is in the coalition is saying it's almost over. In fact, Israel's defense minister said today the war will continue without any time limit for as long as necessary. And on the ground today, the same day Trump said there's nothing left to hit, Iranian drones struck fuel tanks in Oman. Iran launched its most intense and heaviest barrage of the war, and 3 more ships were attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. Great. Moving on, a record of barrels of oil are set to be released from emergency reserves due to the soaring prices amid the war in Iran. The International Energy Agency agreed today to release 400 million barrels of oil, the largest coordinated stockpile release in the agency's 50-year history, and more than double the release in 2022 after Russia invaded the Ukraine. The release will be spaced over at least 2 months, with participating countries given up to 90 days to deliver their share. IEA member countries hold over 1.2 billion barrels in public emergency stocks, plus another 600 million in industry reserves. Now, the reserves buy time, but they don't reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And to put the numbers in perspective, 400 million barrels last roughly 4 days. Yeesh. And over and inside Iran, the government is tightening control over the online narratives surrounding the war. Authorities say 81 people have been arrested for posting content on social media that officials claim created what they described as tension for the public mind. The phrase comes from Iran's National Security Forces commander, who warned that anyone spreading material considered destabilizing during wartime could be treated as an enemy of the state. The arrests were first reported by the Associated Press and appear to be part of a broader effort by several governments in the region to control wartime information online. Human rights organizations say that dozens of people have also been detained in Bahrain and Qatar for sharing posts authorities described as misleading or inflammatory. Israel has imposed its own restrictions as well, banning the publication of photos or videos that could reveal the location of military strikes. Rights groups argue that these measures raise concerns about freedom of expression, while governments say controlling information is necessary to prevent panic and protect operational security. What's unfolding here highlights a shift in how modern conflicts actually operate. The battle over information, what gets posted or shared or suppressed online, is now considered almost as strategically important as what happens on the battlefield itself. And over in Washington, D.C., visitors walking across the National Mall recently encountered something that definitely wasn't part of the Smithsonian Tour brochure. A nearly 12-foot statue depicting Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein appeared on the lawn, recreating the iconic pose from the movie Titanic. Now, yes, the one where the characters stand at the front of the ship with their arms stretched in the wind, saying they're the kings of the world or whatever. You remember it. Now, the installation was created by an anonymous art collective calling itself the Secret Handshake. And according to the group, the statue is meant as a political commentary referencing Trump's past social relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, who was later convicted of sex offenses involving minors. The collective has pulled similar stunts before, as just 5 months ago, they placed another statue in Washington depicting Trump holding hands with Epstein. Take a look.
Here in D.C., take a look. A statue of President Trump has appeared on the National Mall. It depicts Trump holding hands with Jeffrey Epstein. A plaque reads, "In honor of Friendship Month, we celebrate the long-lasting bond between President Donald J. Trump and his closest friend, Jeffrey Epstein." Now, authorities have not said who put this statue there. Trump has repeatedly tried to distance himself from Epstein after a birthday letter bearing his signature surfaced. President Trump has denied writing that letter.
Now, the new sculpture has already drawn crowds and sparked debates online about whether it qualifies as satire, protest, or political provocation. And moments like this show how modern political discourse increasingly spills out of campaign speeches and into viral public spectacles, where a single image, or in this case, a 12-foot statue, can drive conversation across the entire internet within hours. All right, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News. And when we're back, we're going to take a deep dive into some of today's biggest news. And joining us will be independent journalist Frank Corba to help us make sense of it all. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. In the United States, the IRS appears to be stepping up its efforts to track cryptocurrency activity, and a newly surfaced audit document is raising eyebrows across the crypto world. The Bitcoin media outlet TFTC recently posted on X that the IRS has begun using a document during certain crypto tax audits. The post says that taxpayers under the audit are being sent a historical digital asset form listing more than 100 plus exchanges and self-custody wallets, including Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, FTX, Mt. Gox, MetaMask, Ledger, Trezor, and demands you check yes or no for every single one of them, and then sign under the penalty of perjury, of course. Tax attorneys say the document does exist, though it's not a standard IRS filing that everyone receives. Instead, it appears to be used specifically during crypto-related tax audits to help investigators build a complete picture of a taxpayer's digital asset activity. The document itself is titled List of Digital Asset Platforms, Wallets, Services, and Products Used by Individual Taxpayers. Critics say the form functions as a kind of mapping exercise, allowing regulators to reconstruct a person's crypto footprint across exchanges, wallets, and even decentralized finance tools. And the timing here is notable. The IRS is already preparing to roll out a new reporting requirements, including Form 1099-DA, which will require crypto brokers to begin reporting transaction data directly to the government starting this year. Now, taken together, these developments suggest that the era of relatively loose crypto tax reporting in the U.S. is coming to an end, and that regulators are moving toward much deeper visibility into how Americans use digital assets. All right, joining me to make sense of this story and others, our favorite independent journalist and friend of the program, Frank Corva, everybody. Frank, welcome back to the show. Happy Wednesday. How are you?
Good to be here with you as always, Hank. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, Frank. And we've got a lot to talk about, specifically this new IRS audit document, the historical digital asset form. It's getting a lot of attention in the crypto world. What are your initial thoughts on this when you first heard of it, Frank? I'd love to get your beat.
Yeah, I think I saw the tweet yesterday or the day before, whenever Marty and the TFTC group posted it. And it is just depressing, to be honest. It was just yet another sort of infringement upon privacy. Speaking specifically to Bitcoin here, this is equivalent in my mind saying which jeans and which pocket do you keep your cash in, if you think about it. So it's like Bitcoin is online money, right? It's money that we hold in our own self-custody if you're doing it properly. I don't know shade on people who are leaving on an exchange, but hold your money in self-custody, hold your Bitcoin in self-custody. So it's something that belongs to us. It's like saying, what corner of the basement do you keep your bars of gold in, right? It's the equivalent in my mind. So I think that, again, one of the main questions that we have to ask ourselves if we're going to become, quote unquote, the crypto capital of the world is what privacy looks like in that world, what P2P rights, peer-to-peer rights look like in that world. And forms like this, in my mind, illustrate the fact that we are not on our way to becoming the crypto capital of the world, because privacy is a part of the equation. And if it means that we're basically just helping the IRS track everything we do as if we were using CBDCs or something on a centralized ledger, then we're not moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I really love that analogy, just telling people what side of your pants pockets your jeans are in. It's kind of like, it makes me think like the government is Nelson the bully from The Simpsons, and he just wants to shake us upside down and take all of our cryptos. But, we are seeing that some tax attorneys are saying that this form isn't something that everyone will receive, but rather something that appears during crypto-related audits. So, Frank, in practical terms, like how significant is this development for people who hold or trade digital assets? Am I going to need to, if I ever used Mt. Gox or anything else, I need to tell the government now? That's kind of silly.
Silly, I agree. That's a good adjective for it. Yeah, I agree. And I think saying that it's just for people who are going through some sort of audit is oftentimes the way that these things start. So it's like, you know what, just to be safe now, instead of giving it to just the people who are being audited, let's just give it to everybody. And again, I think that we're relatively early to having this conversation around privacy in the digital age. I think it's really important that we do so, but most people are still, most people still think Bitcoin is a scam, and they're still using apps like Venmo and PayPal and everything else here in the United States that offer zero privacy, and they're posting on Facebook, which offers zero privacy, and doing all of this with very, without really thinking twice about it. So I think that, as much as we're all outraged in this space, I get the impression that maybe some of the normies who have dabbled in crypto, and I don't use that term condescendingly, people who aren't just as involved as some of us in this space are, aren't really going to think twice about it. They'll just simply say, well, my Fidelity account is tracked and my Charles Schwab account is tracked. So yeah, I guess these crypto devices and wallets and exchanges should be tracked as well. I hope that that's not how it goes down. I just fear that that's going to be the way that it is, and that very quickly the IRS will extend this form to people, or they'll be sending this form to people outside of those who are just being audited.
Yeah. It's a weird thing that, like, I think about the last 20 years, really since the advent of social media. Like, we got so comfortable just putting everything about our lives into the world. And now we're starting to realize, like, hey, maybe this wasn't the best idea after all. And now it's like a full pivot back the other way. If you're an Arrested Development fan at all, ironically, in their ill-fated fourth season, there's a fake company called Fake Block that they make that's essentially a super privacy tool. And they were ahead of their times with that, because that's kind of what we're seeing developed now. And, Frank, as somebody like yourself who's covered crypto policy and regulation extensively, do you see this as part of a broader shift toward much tighter government oversight of the crypto industry here in the United States? Like you mentioned, if we want to be the crypto capital of the world, privacy is part of that. But the United States seems to be kind of tightening things up. What is your read on the situation currently, and where do you think we're headed?
Yeah, I would say the good thing here is that privacy inevitably, just because we're having these conversations now, is the Overton window on it is shifting, and it is going to be something that we have to discuss. And I'll shout out someone like Hester Pierce, one of the commissioners at the SEC, that has spoken very clearly in favor of crypto mixers and technology that enhances privacy. And also, I believe it was a congressional report that recently came out that was released by, I think the Treasury put it out, saying that, actually there is some legitimate use cases for privacy. So I don't know is my answer. I think these systems benefit from us not having privacy, whether that's the government trying to sort of get paid their capital gains taxes on crypto trades, which is fine. I'm not telling people to avoid paying their taxes. That's not what I'm here to do. You should pay your taxes, but it's I think that there's going to have to be a broader discussion, and I think all of us are going to have to raise our voices, not only to stop open source developers who are creating privacy tools from going to prison, which I think we might touch on in our conversation today, for being tried for that matter. But it's, I just think that, again, I've mentioned this on the show. I've asked regulators and former regulators, whether you're using a stable coin or Bitcoin to transact, would you want me to see your entire balance? Because that's what happens when you transact with, let's just take Tether or USDC on Tron or something. Whatever wallet you send that from, whatever address you send it from, I can now see that. So in a way, this is far worse than using a bank account, far worse than even using a CBDC, something where the back end is private or the ledger is private. This way, you're sort of seeing everyone's entire ledger. You can trace some of their other parts of their transaction history. And I would have to imagine that nobody in government wants that. And therefore, they should not want the same for their constituents or for the people that, they serve as regulators.
Yeah. And, if we're looking ahead, Frank, with new rules like the 1099 DA, which requires brokers to report transactions directly to the IRS, I believe it started was like end of last year or this year. Do you in any way feel that we are getting dangerously close to a system where crypto activity is tracked similarly to traditional financial accounts? Does that concern you at all?
Oh, I would imagine that's the intent of the powers that be. Yeah. I think that that's the idea, that as we move into this digital age, just privacy doesn't exist, etc. That's how some people think about this stuff. And the argument will always happen under the guise of we need to do it to protect you. That's how the Patriot Act sort of gained traction. That's how other acts and other laws that have come to fruition in the last 20 years since the internet has become as ubiquitous and prevalent as it is. That's how this stuff goes. And so I think that we're going to have to come to some sort of consciousness level around it, and to say that, no, we are entitled to some of these rights, and for many, many reasons, all of which I cannot get into here. But this is just something that's going to be important. And again, it's going to be important to the powers that be as well. It's not just going to be important to everyday users. It's going to be important to every single person. Why do we, it's privacy exists in all forms in our life, and things that we don't think twice about. Why do we close the shades at night? Why do we do certain things to sort of, close ourselves off to the world in a certain way, to not reveal certain select things about ourselves? We have the right to do that with money. It's just that we've never had to have this conversation essentially as a species, because the digital age age is not that new. It's only been here for about 2.5 decades or so. In, probably even less if we really talk about like social media and people interacting more through these things and also transacting more through these rails. So I'm hopeful that we'll get this right and that we'll push back and that will lead the way here in the United States. I just think that there's going to be, I think people are going to need to feel some discomfort and to almost feel a little bit of like their privacy being violated. I don't wish that on anyone, but oftentimes I think pain is a teacher where intellectual curiosity kind of falls short.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time. We as humans always got to touch that hot stove to believe it's hot. We just won't take someone's word for it most of the time. Before we wrap up with this one, I have one last question for you, Frank. As we're seemingly moving toward this world where the government wants to track crypto and Bitcoin similarly to traditional finance, do you think there's anything we as an average Bitcoiner can do to help stop that process going forward, or keep Bitcoin the pure decentralized thing it was always meant to be?
Yeah, I think there's two main things you can do. One, do not think about the government as a monolith. Do not think about it as this impenetrable, huge thing far off in the distance that you have no effect, that you can't have any effect on. There are people like Hester Pierce in government. There are even Democrats. Democrats traditionally in the United States aren't really big on Bitcoin/crypto, but there are the Ro Khannas of the world, the Richie Torreses of the world who do understand the importance of this technology. So don't just say, oh, they're all the same. These write to your politician, call your local elected official and raise your voice about this stuff. That stuff does make a difference. And I think I think that was the second point I was going to make, is that you have to be proactive. So the first is psychological. Don't just think that nothing can change and we're just inevitably going to move in this direction. If we were to apply that mentality, across the board in the United States, we never would have had the civil rights movement. We never would have had all of these amazing things that make America what it is, that make us move towards in the right direction in terms of the arc of justice and human rights and many of the things that, we take for granted and that are now going to be challenged in the digital age.
Yeah, as the unborn baby of Gandhi and Satoshi Nakamoto would always say, be the Bitcoin you wish to serve. I had it in my mind.
Something along those lines, something around there.
Be the Bitcoin you wish to see in the world. I don't know. It made sense before. We're going to move on to the next story. I haven't had coffee this morning, so hang 10 there, Frank, because we're going to go into our next deep dive that's happening over in Venezuela, a country that has spent years struggling with power outages and crumbling infrastructure. Bitcoin mining companies, however, may soon be stepping in to help rebuild parts of the electrical grid. In fact, our guest here, Frank, recently reported on a proposal being developed by Alessandro Cassera, known online as El Sultan de Bitcoin. Now, Cassera, and we're going to get a correct pronunciation on that name in a bit, is exploring a plan to bring industrial Bitcoin miners into Venezuela through formal agreements with the government. The idea is fairly simple on paper. Mining companies would help fund repairs and upgrades to sections of Venezuela's neglected power infrastructure. In exchange, those miners would receive access to extremely cheap electricity, potentially as low as 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt per hour, a price that would make the country one of the most attractive places in the world to mine Bitcoin. Now, the proposal builds on Cassera's own experience in Venezuela's early Bitcoin mining scene. You see, during the country's economic collapse in the 2010s, heavily subsidized electricity allowed miners to produce Bitcoin at near zero cost. Now, Cassera says he ran one of the largest mining operations in Latin America between 2013 and 2015, taking advantage of those very conditions. This new model would essentially formalize that dynamic. Instead of miners simply benefiting from cheap electricity, they would help improve the grid itself. Bitcoin miners could also act as the energy economists call buyers of the last, let me read that one again. Bitcoin miners could also act as what energy economists call buyers of the last resort. That means that they consume excess electricity when demand is low and scale back when households or businesses need more, helping stabilize the grid. Versions of this model are already operating in parts of Africa where Bitcoin mining is being used to support local energy products and improve power reliability. The big question now, though, is whether a similar model could realistically work in Venezuela, a country with enormous energy potential, but a very complicated political and economic environment. We're bringing Frank back. And Frank, you wrote that you spoke with the guy who was working to make this a reality. Could you share more about that conversation with us? What exactly would these deals between miners and Venezuelan governments look like in practice? We'd love to learn more.
Yeah, great question. I think the pronunciation of his last name, I probably should have checked with him. Cesare or Cesare? I'm not positive, to be honest. C-E-C.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds fancy. Yeah. So yes, Alessandro, if you're watching, please pardon us gringos butchering your last name. We apologize. So I don't think that we know what these deals will look like. I just know that Alessandro, as I wrote about and what he mentioned when I spoke with him via my podcast was, he ran what was once the biggest Bitcoin mining farm in Latin America, or most likely the biggest Bitcoin mining farm in Latin America. So I think he just has a very good sense of seeing opportunity. And then the opportunity, as you mentioned, was the fact that power was subsidized in Venezuela. So you could protest about everything that was wrong with Venezuela at the time, or you could say, okay, wait a second, I have free electricity. I'm going to plug in every Bitcoin miner I can get my hands on. And that's what he did. And he was a smart guy in that regard. So I think that I say this in a very, in a very profound way. I think he sees opportunities and opportunist in the best sense of the term. And I think right now what he's seeing is that we're in the early stages of ideally what will be a restabilization of Venezuela, something that will take it out of the sort of nightmare that it's been in for the last almost 2.5 decades. I think Chavez came into power in the late 90s. So it's been an absolutely brutal situation there. The last decade especially has been particularly bad. So I think what he sees here is, okay, basically, the system that was in place was not taking care of the power grid. We're struggling to get power to a lot of people in different parts of the country, especially maybe some of the more far-reaching parts of the country. Bitcoin miners, there's this proof that we've seen with this company Gridless in Africa, where as the buyer of last resort, which you described, there's someone to always buy the electricity, especially when people aren't using it. You have incentive now to develop more power structure. So in Africa, what we're seeing in rural Africa is more power structure getting built out. What we would see in Venezuela is more power structure getting repaired. And this is a win-win-win, because the companies that come in win, they're mining Bitcoin at a cheap rate. The power structure gets repaired, and generally speaking, I think you also then see maybe some more local employment of people there being able to work at some of these power facilities. So there's so much that can happen here. I think Alessandro's in the early stages of working with the team at Luxor to incentivize some of these miners to come in. I would say the hardest part is going to be getting the first two to come in and to show the world that there is no jurisdictional risk anymore there. Venezuela has traditionally been literally yet a third of the population leave the country. So you have to show people that it's safe to be back there, that these miners can operate there profitably, and that the miners can give something back to Venezuela and the Venezuelan people by helping to rehabilitate their grid.
Interesting. And Frank, you have to forgive me. I'm not Mr. Burns. I don't know a lot about, creating electricity or power and storing it. But we talked about this buyers of the last resort for the electricity, where they're consuming excess power when demand is low. Did your friend who you spoke to about this explain how that actually works? Because I don't really understand it. So if you have this excess power, you can't store it. You need to put it somewhere, and then it would go to the Bitcoin miners. Otherwise, it's all just kind of for naught. Am I understanding that generally the right way?
Great. Yep. Almost 99% there. I would say to clarify it. So a while back, I interviewed one of the founders of Gridless, and she described it in very simple terms. She said, look, in the African villages that we work in, we do a lot of, we curtail our power usage. We don't use power when people are maybe getting ready for school and work, and when they come home at night and they need to use power to do their homework by a lamp or something like that. So we're not going to use it at any point during that time. And the amazing part about Gridless, by the way, is that they use completely hydroelectric power. It's just flowing water from the rivers alongside these villages. So all renewable energy, amazing, amazing work. So, but while people are at work and maybe not using electricity in the homes, or there's a little bit of a lower usage during the day, or when they're sleeping at night and nobody's using the electricity because the lights are off, they can essentially say, okay, well, we're going to mine Bitcoin in the meantime. And what often happens is that when you build power structures, at least in these parts of Africa, and I think it's probably similar in Venezuela, a lot of these structures have the capacity to produce even more electricity than they're actually producing. So if they produce more of that electricity, now you have a buyer of that electricity. The other really cool thing that happens here is that now that Bitcoin miners are buying this electricity, the electric rates actually come down because it's almost subsidized now by the Bitcoin miners. So it becomes more affordable for people in these African villages. This same dynamic has a potential to play out in Venezuela. Obviously, we're going to have to see how the dots get connected and the pieces get put into place. But we do have a model for it with what the team at Gridless is doing. And I think it could be a really exciting development in Venezuela. And I think a way for people to look at Bitcoin in a totally different light. This ability to be a catalyst for rehabilitation would be a totally new and exciting narrative.
Yeah, and that kind of begs the question, Frank. Like, do you see this kind of Bitcoin plus energy infrastructure model becoming more common in countries with underdeveloped power systems? It kind of seems like a no-brainer, right?
100%, especially countries that have access to stranded energy. Another thing Alessandro talked a lot about, there's a lot of flared gas in Venezuela because they're huge oil producers and natural gas producers. You can use that flared gas also to mine the Bitcoin. So if you have stranded energy, wasted energy, hydroelectric energy, other natural sources of energy that are renewable, that are cheap, this is definitely a no-brainer. You're basically turning otherwise what would be waste energy or sunlight or flowing water into magic internet money, Bitcoin, if you will. So it's like, into that, why wouldn't you do that? And essentially, if you get that dynamic where they're the buyers of last resort and you can work with the power grid to say, hey, look, we get that people need to use this electricity. We don't want to make it difficult for them or more expensive when they really need to use it. So we'll work with you to shut on and off based on how much people are using electricity in the city, in the village, etc. And I have other examples of this happening around the world already, but I think it's going to become far more ubiquitous.
Yeah, and there was one other positive this I should mention. They also say that, I guess, by putting this last resort option can also help stabilize Venice, like the grid. How does it help stabilize the grid? Is it just managing the electricity better? Is that essentially what that means?
I think so, for sure. So there's also parts where they could, I believe, so this is a little bit above my pay grade, where the miners, some of the electricity they're buying, if they need to give power back to the grid, let's just say there's a natural disaster and some of the power generation plants go offline. If these if they're basically if they purchase some of this energy already, they could say, you know what, like we see this in Texas a lot. Miners often shut down if there's a storm in Texas or in some other part of the United States. They say, okay, you need the grid right now, no big deal, we're happy to shut down. And I think that this creates a really symbiotic relationship where it's like, look, we're not just super opportunists, just looking to sort of take advantage of every cheap gigawatt or kilowatt hour of electricity we can get our hands on. We're here, we're a business, but we're also here cognizant of the community's needs and the situation that the community is in. So we have a model for this, both in the United States and abroad already. And I think the same can be applied in Venezuela.
Yeah, and I think you're right, my friend. So I appreciate helping us break that all down, especially with your experience actually interviewing there. It was been lost on me otherwise. So I appreciate you breaking it down in terms that even I can understand. With that being said, Frank, you and I are going to take a quick break, but when we're back, we're going to jump into what's going on with Tornado Cash's developer who's got some trouble with the DOJ. So stay tuned. Frank and I will be talking about that and more when we come back here at RoxomTV News. Stay tuned.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Over in Venezuela, home to the largest proven oil reserves in the world, major Western energy companies are preparing for a significant return. Reuters reports that Chevron and Shell are closing in on new oil production agreements with Venezuela's state energy company, PDVSA. If finalized, these would be the first major oil deals in the country since the United States captured President Nicolas Maduro earlier this year. Now, the companies would gain expanded access to Venezuela's heavy oil belt, one of the largest untapped petroleum regions on the planet. At the same time, PDVSA is reviewing all of its existing contracts and warning that projects that remain inactive or underperforming could see their deals revoked by the end of March. Now, the timing of these negotiations is not exactly subtle. With shipping disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz and energy infrastructure across parts of the Gulf under pressure, global oil markets are facing one of their most volatile periods in decades. President Trump has described the Venezuelan effort as part of a $100 billion push to rebuild the country's oil industry after years of economic collapse under the Maduro and Chavez governments. Now, when supply shocks hit global energy markets, producers that have been sidelined for years suddenly become strategically important again. And Venezuela is now moving quickly back into that conversation. Over at the United Nations, diplomats gathered for an emergency security council meeting focused on the rapidly worsening fighting in Lebanon. The session was called by France and supported by the United Kingdom, Denmark, Greece, and Latvia as violence along Israel's northern border continues to intensify. But the most notable development may be a draft resolution introduced by Bahrain calling for an immediate halt to Iranian attacks on Gulf states and demanding an end to the use of proxy militias in the conflict. That proposal is expected to head toward a vote. The urgency comes from how quickly the Lebanon front has expanded since Hezbollah entered the war earlier this month. At least 570 people have been killed and more than 500,000 displaced, according to regional estimates. And Israel has launched a ground incursion involving commandos operating under the cover of darkness, while Hezbollah says it detected Israeli helicopters approaching from Syrian territory. Airstrikes have also intensified. Israeli strikes killed at least 95 people in Lebanon on Tuesday alone, including a Maronite Catholic priest in the southern village of Kleya, after he told France 24 that he planned to stay and defend his village peacefully. Lebanon's parliament has extended its own term by 2 years amid the instability, while Israel's defense minister says the military campaign has no fixed timeline. And whenever the Lebanon front heats up, it tends to signal that a regional conflict may be entering a more unpredictable phase. On to the next deep dive of the day. The U.S. Department of Justice is now officially moving to retry Tornado Cash developer Roman Storm, according to a new filing out of the Southern District of New York. In a letter dated March 9th to Judge Catherine Polk-Falia, prosecutors asked the court to schedule a second trial on 2 charges that were left unresolved during Storm's first trial back in 2025. Those charges are conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to violate U.S. sanctions law. You see, according to the prosecutors, the retrial would last about 3 weeks, and they're suggesting a start date somewhere around October 5th. So yeah, this legal battle is far from over. And to understand why this case matters so much, we need to rewind a little bit. You see, Roman Storm was originally indicted in 2023 for helping build Tornado Cash, which is a privacy protocol in Ethereum designed to obscure transaction history. Or in simple terms, it's software that allows people to break the public link between sending and receiving funds on the blockchain. Now that kind of privacy tool can be used for legitimate reasons as well. People wanting financial privacy, for instance. But prosecutors argue it was also used to launder funds, including money tied to sanctioned entities. Storm's trial took place in August of 2025, and the jury reached a split outcome. They convicted him on 1 charge related to operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. But when it came to the 2 bigger charges, money laundering and sanctions violations, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. That's what lawyers call a hung jury, which means prosecutors get the option to try again. And that's exactly what they're doing. Storm's legal team has pushed back strongly on the case from the beginning, arguing that the government is essentially trying to hold an open source software developer responsible for how strangers use code that he doesn't control. Which, if that argument sounds familiar, it's because it's part of a much larger debate happening right now in the crypto industry. The retrial has already sparked strong reactions across the legal world. Amanda Tuminelli, executive director and chief legal officer at the DeFi Education Fund, wrote this about the decision, saying the DOJ has decided it will retry Roman Storm in the fall. despite failing to convince a jury the first time around, despite making obvious mistakes like calling irrelevant witnesses and not understanding the forensic analysis of their own blockchain evidence, and despite multiple legal and logical fallacies to their allegations of third-party dev liability, the SDNY will retry Roman Storm on counts 1 and 3 of the indictment. Incredibly disappointing news. And that concern isn't limited to just lawyers. Our own Frank Corva, our guest for today, also weighed in on X, writing, appalling. The case never should have gone trial in the first place. It's completely insane. Roman Storm will be retried. It seems that the Blanche memo was basically performative and that FinCEN guidance apparently means nothing. This case being retried means the U.S. is very much not on its way to becoming the crypto capital of the world. In fact, quite the opposite. Now, whether you agree with that take or not, the underlying issue here is pretty clear. This case is becoming a major test of whether developers write decentralized software can be held criminally liable for how that software gets used once it's released into the world. Frank, first thoughts. Tell us how you really feel about this one. I don't think I got it fully from the quote.
As I said, I think, P2P rights are a big part of this equation. I often cite Peter von Valkenburg. He said, we're very much in the United States on the way to becoming the crypto capital of the world as far as securitized and regulated crypto products are concerned. But in terms of P2P rights, the ability to transact permissionlessly and with privacy, we're not doing a great job on that front. And I think that this case being retried is proof of that. I sat in the courtroom all this summer. I was at almost every date of the trial. And Roman Storm, I spoke with Roman personally. Even in the evidence that was provided, he did everything in his power with the front end that he operated for Tornado Cash. So for those who don't understand, Tornado Cash is immutable code that exists on the internet. It just exists there. Anybody can use it. Roman Storm operated a front end, and his business, years after the front end was first established, did make some money on this, but it was very clear that ideology was driving him versus profitability. This was surely not the initial aim of what he was doing. So he was tried on these 3 different counts, and the only count to which he was found guilty was the operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, which was even another dubious charge to begin with, because FinCEN, which is a department at the Treasury, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the Treasury, said in guidance in 2019 that if you're not touching the private keys to users' funds, then you are not a money transmitter. So I don't know how one can be found guilty of being a money transmitter if they weren't acting as a money transmitter. So the fact that this is going back to court to try these other 2 counts is quite insane. I will say, to piggyback on what Amanda said, it was basically some of the people that the prosecution brought to speak in trial, totally forgetting the word for that right now, but really did not know what they were talking about. They were very much off the mark in trying to make the points that they were trying to make. And it really was like amateur hour. It was like JV hour for a lot of that. The defense, Roman Storm's defense, was much more sophisticated. They made very clear statements to the jury. The big issue here is that this technology is very, very new. The jury, I think, did a really good job in wrapping their head around it, just based on literally just how much they were paying attention. As a former teacher, I can usually tell when people are completely zoned out and when they're paying attention.
Pay attention, guys.
Yeah, let's go. And they did seem like they did their best to wrap their head around, what this technology did, what level of involvement Roman Storm had with it. And I think that I was obviously a bit disappointed to see that they even found him guilty on the 1 charge, but I think that the case was already thoroughly tried. The idea of retrying this just seems totally silly. I'm nervous to see what they're going to try to spin, what the prosecution is going to try to spin to say that Roman Storm had more control over this than he actually did. Not only that, but Roman Storm, when the authorities did find out about him running the front end and all that, they said, look, we want certain addresses blacklisted. We want you to incorporate certain software that will make it harder for bad actors to use this. He did all of that. He complied with all of that. Anything he had control over, he complied with. Having a mutable code on the internet that anyone else can interact with, he can't do anything about that. Yeah. We have a right to publish that code under the First Amendment in the United States. Roman Storm lives in Seattle. He's a U.S. citizen. He was allowed to do that. So there was nothing done illegal here. The prosecution lost fair and square on this 1st and 3rd count. The fact that they want to do this again, it just seems like, I don't even know how to put it into words, to be honest. It's just incredibly disappointing.
Yeah, and at the center of this trial is a pretty fundamental legal question that we've heard a lot here in the industry, and that's whether a developer can be held responsible for how other people use open source software that they help create. That's similar to what we heard with Samurai Wallet, right? It's like pretty much the same thing.
100%. Yeah. And so developers can't be. So I get the idea of saying, well, you were running a front end or you were running a business that was profitable. It's still not it doesn't necessarily fall under something that's prosecutable, but I get that there needs to maybe be a discussion around that. I wouldn't even say there needs to be, but I get why there might be a discussion around that, because the technology is something that didn't exist maybe when FinCEN came into existence, or maybe it has evolved since the guidance that they offered in 2019. Still, that guidance says if you're not touching keys, you're not doing anything wrong. And I think that there's we have the two Samurai developers in jail right now, wrongfully in jail. They shouldn't be there. We have Roman Storm on trial, and it's I don't know how to put it. Disappointing is really it's not strong enough of a word. In terms of publishing this code, though, people are saying we need more protections in the Market Structure Act, the Clarity Act. And we do. Ideally, we want to see protections for this sort of technology, but at the same time, again, what they didn't violate FinCEN guidance, and under the First Amendment in the United States, you're allowed to publish this code. Freedom of speech, this was established by court precedent in the 1990s.
Yeah. And one final question, Frank, and then I think we got to end our time today. Why do you think this particular question has become such a major flashpoint in the crypto industry? Is it because if you do this, it really stifles innovation, which seems like an obvious, but does it also kind of relate itself over to like the idea of Bitcoin as this open code, like people say, oh, Bitcoin is criminals use it, so it must be bad. Is this kind of similarly along those lines? Like it's a tool and the person who creates the tool the tool itself can't be blamed for how bad actors choose to use it. Is that kind of a similar framing, you think, for both of these here, or am I maybe missing something?
Let me cite Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who published a memo. That's what I referenced in my tweet, the Blanche memo. It's called for short. I don't know what the actual name of it is. Beginning of April 2025, saying we are not going to go after people creating the technology, even people creating crypto mixers or the crypto mixers themselves. We are going to go after the end users who do bad stuff with this technology. Here's why I think one, that was just performative. It seemed like empty rhetoric. I emailed Todd, the DOJ for months, or for 2 months after that memo was issued, to say, okay, when are you going to step in to stop the Samurai and Tornado Cash cases from proceeding? Never got an answer on that. But the other side to this is that so it's harder to go after the bad guys. It's hard to go after all the bad guys who do really bad stuff with cash on a daily basis across the globe. This goes on all the time. We know that. So we know that it's hard to go after the bad guys. It doesn't mean that that's the reason to go after, even after you said you're not going to go after the people creating the technology. There's no grounds for that. I think the fact that we've been sort of stonewalled, those of us who are reporting on this, it's been really difficult to get a straight answer. Again, I want to shout out Hester Pierce. I think she's great. And there's been a handful of other politicians, some on the state level, some on the federal level, that have said these things have a right to exist. Ideally, I would love for them to speak up more to the powers that be, given that they're a part of the system. But it really is up to the rest of us to not necessarily forget about these developers, to not forget about this issue, and to keep raising our voices about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're certainly doing God's work to help make sure that these voices are heard, Frank. And before we let you go, I believe you just got some exciting news in your world.
Yeah.
That I think I was hoping you'd share with the class this morning.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just joined the team at Fedi. Really, really exciting. So Fedi is a company that does work with federations, which basically allow people to use eCash on top of the Lightning Network on Bitcoin. But it also does a lot of great work around privacy, encrypted communications, and just general comms, being able to use comms. I would just call it like a great sort of freedom tech stack that people can use to transact, to communicate with one another, to start communities online, but in a way that's a lot more private than most other apps that we're used to using. So really excited to join Obi and the team. They're great people. We're doing really great work with great organizations, Save the Children, other massive organizations. There's different Bitcoin circular economies that are using this technology, people who are really using it for not only for privacy purposes, but for financial inclusion purposes, and for a bunch of other things related to human rights. And I'm really, really excited to be a part of the team. So yeah, that's going to be my full-time gig for the time being. So I might need a new introduction when I come on Wednesdays. I'll still be an independent journalist at heart, and I'll still be doing some independent journalism, but very, very proud to be a part of the Fetty team.
Amazing. Well, we're getting that new intro ready for you, Frank, and I can't wait to have you back next week. I want to thank you for your time this morning. It's always the highlight of my Wednesday, and I'll be excited for more next Wednesday, my friend. Enjoy the rest of your week in the meantime, though.
Appreciate that, sir. Thank you, Hank. Talk soon, everybody.
Appreciate you. Cheers. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by our resident chart shark, Luca Pagano, to make sense of the market and maybe even tell you where he thinks it's going next. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV News coming your way after this.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? Because I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. You can buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. All right, welcome back to Roxom TV News. As you've noticed, probably the world is crazy right now, which means the markets are reflective of that. So joining me right now to break them down and hopefully make a little sense of it all, we have our own local resident chart shark, Luca Pagano, joining us today. Luca, how are you? Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.
Hank, how are you, man? It's great to see you as always. So glad to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Luca. And I and our audience, now more than ever, we need your insights. We have seen this market. Remember, just a couple of months ago, we were soaring high. I was feeling good. I was ready to buy a lake house. We're at 120, 126. Now we're back down, hanging out around 70. What are you seeing right now from the charts, and what are you expecting as we round out the second half of the month of March?
Good. That's what we all want to know, you know. So let's try to figure it out together here, Hank. You know, as you were saying, like I want to just keep things very simple. This is a weekly chart, guys. We're at the highest volume range we had in the latest bull cycle. You know, this is a bull cycle. This is a bear cycle. I don't really know. I just I don't care too much about what type of cycle we're at right now, but maybe I do care about what's gonna happen with our Bitcoin, right? So the analysis there, Hank, is you are basically in the high traffic zone, I'd say, you know, where investors mostly transacted in this area where we were thinking, you know, are we gonna go is this a huge double top basically with latest high of the market, remember, on 2021, or are we just gonna go and find out how much Bitcoin is worth, you know? And we did we did something beautiful, of course, which we all just like to get back on there. So the thing here is, I think investors are honestly accumulating in this area, and it makes sense for me. Why do I have sort of purple lines here and white lines here? Let me tell you real quick that, Hank, my thesis. I believe that the range today is very tight, right? I don't think that accumulation will be so short, you know, in terms of ranges. Like, I think this is the best example of it. We've got here basically since March till September, we've just waited and passed hands, and it was, you know, it was so boring. I remember this very
Mm-hmm.
well. That's why, like, so I think we will see maybe not something as long, but I do expect this to wiggle a little bit more. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and I think this range itself is too tight. You know, from the low, Hank, we're essentially 18% or so, right? As of right now,
Right.
which is nice. It's nice. And
Yeah.
even though you can even bounce, which I do expect,
Mm-hmm.
until 80K. But I do expect a little bit more wiggling. For us, the Bulls, what would be nice for me would be like just take this, wiggle a little bit here, and just overshoot. That would be amazing for me. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm cautious as well to take this low here, and then start and the range for it to take a little bit longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, that does, Luca. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about, I want to look under the hood a little bit,
Yeah.
the best we can here. I mean, it's going to take some speculation on our ends, but I'd love to talk about it. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of geopolitical risk in play, and that's clearly affecting markets right now. With that being said, though, the pullback we've seen from Bitcoin was about, I think, at its height, about 54% of this most recent large downturn,
Yep.
which falls very much in line with what we've seen during prior cycles, except it's a lot less of a pullback. I think it was like 90s, and then it was in the 70s%. Now we're in like the 50s. So right now, what do you think is really happening to Bitcoin under the hood? Because we're seeing right now, MicroStrategy is not being shy. They're still scooping up Bitcoin like they've got nothing else to do. And
Same.
they seem to be buying all of it up. And the price seems to be stabilizing right between this, $65,000, $70,000 mark. So do you think we're at that phase right now, or maybe a lot of the leverage hands we saw previously got flushed out in that downturn? And right now we're seeing kind of a simple exchange maybe between retail and institutions as they continue just to kind of swallow up anything that's available. I mean, whether it's MicroStrategy, the ETFs, BlackRock. Do you think that might be an accurate assessment at all of what is currently happening, or is it just really impossible to know at this juncture?
I mean, it's a great question, Hank, because what I believe with everything that's going on across equities, itself, you guys are following great the global news as well. So like I think our listeners are quite insightful on that. Considering those things, I think Bitcoin stands at a pretty particular place, to be honest, because on the one hand, like I think the best scenario of a crisis was COVID, right? Where Bitcoin,
Yeah.
of course, it had its risk off moment, but it also shined a lot in terms of inflation kicks in, Bitcoin becomes a scarce asset. Everyone knows that, and it sort of gets its own momentum, ahead of the market.
Yeah.
I do see that as a very good possibility. If unfortunately, the global macro becomes a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
I do definitely expect that because of because of the economics behind Bitcoin, what it's meant, what it means, and also like how it tends to correlate in that extremes with gold. So
Right.
overall, Bitcoin is, we know what Bitcoin behaves like. It behaves like a risk on asset, like equities do, especially tech companies. But when real risk, or extremes kick in, at least as what we've seen here in history, Hank, Bitcoin becomes a different beast. And I think like that is very interesting for listeners to know. Of course,
Yeah.
I mean, I would hate something extreme to happen, but like analyzing it technically and objectively, that's at least my thoughts.
Yeah. And one more kind of bigger picture question. We've seen gold have a monumental surge in the last year. I mean, what was the market cap not too long ago? I thought it was like 15 trillion. Now it's in the high 20s, sometimes 30s, depending on the price, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that the amount of people we're seeing fly into a safe haven asset like gold speaks to the appetite we're seeing for investors to put their money somewhere safer, especially amidst all of the geopolitical tension we're seeing right now? And do you think that that bodes specifically well for Bitcoin in the future? Even though people are putting money in gold right now, do you think that that means that Bitcoin's going to be even more of an attractive option as time moves on and people start understanding it? Because it seems like people are freaking out right now. That's why all this money is going into precious metals. So do you think while it's going into metals now, this actually could be a positive development down the line for Bitcoin? Because people are going to be looking for alternatives to put their money, not just necessarily gold. So while gold's having its moment, do you think this could be a big setup for Bitcoin down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that that's when gold and Bitcoin converge, you know? Like, I do find a confluence on the extreme sides. Like, as a quick picture here, hang together, since October, which was pretty much, you know, the peak of Bitcoin as of this cycle, gold crushed it, you know, 40% up. So like, it's clearly a risk-off situation where you see equities also getting punched in the face. You know, if we pull back here very quickly, you know, let's pull the Nasdaq. One sec here for us to know, like, Nasdaq had pretty much a neutral, you know, and since its peak, yeah, minus 4 or 5%, you know. Of course, Bitcoin took the biggest hit, and that's why I think, like, we've absorbed most, if not all, of the correction in my in my opinion, you know.
Okay.
But what happened with gold here is, you know, you're at one of the biggest gaps in terms of gold BTC, you know, and that is very relevant, given that if cards turn a little bit and Bitcoin has some momentum, I do see that gap getting very quickly, you know, closed. So
okay,
yeah,
I'm optimistic about that, and we got to get wrapping up here. But before we go, Luca, really quick, for the end of the month, I don't want an explanation. What are your estimates for potential floor price for Bitcoin and potential ceiling by the end of March? I don't want reasoning. I just want numbers. Really quick. What are your thoughts?
I want Bitcoin at 82K. Basically, and I think the floor has already been met. Let's hope, but
I'd love to hear it.
That's my estimation. If we can close on these levels this week, you know.
Let's go. I love to hear it. And I love having you on the show, Luca. We're not having you enough, my man. And I'm glad we got you in the studio today. Thank you, as always, for sharing your expertise with us and your time. And we got to get you back in here real soon, my friend.
Thank you very much.
I'm just lost in the markets.
You guys are awesome, man. Thank you very much.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good one, Luca. All right, gang. That's a wrap here at Roxom TV News for our Wednesday edition. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. And if you haven't already, do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, me at Hank at Roxom TV. And again, we have so many amazing guests and hosts that you should be following all of them as well. There's so much to learn here at Roxom TV, not just on Roxom TV News, but across the entire Roxom TV family. So make sure you're following. And we'll be back tomorrow at our normal time of 8 a.m. PST right here on Roxom TV, going until 10 a.m. So until then, stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see all you boys and girls on Thursday. See you then.